Hey, it's the Comics Kid 2099, and I'm here to talk about an episode of a superhero animated series. Today, I'll be talking about the Batman the Animated Series episode, Read My Lips. If you haven't seen the episode, get the hints and do so, and then come back here to hear me talk about it. Or if you don't want to, then listen to me quickly sum up the plot of the episode before I get into the review. A boxing ring is robbed, and Batman is having trouble finding out who the boss behind the gang is. It turns out it's a new villain in the show and in Gotham City in the form of the ventriloquist and Scarface. Batman has to outthink a foe he doesn't really understand and stop the gang from robbing a freighter full of valuable metals. Cue credits. As this episode debuted in 1993, the ventriloquist is one of the most recent additions to the Batman mythos included in the show, as he was only introduced in the comics in 1988. Other than Killer Croc and any new additions to the series not found in the comics, most of the villains we see here were introduced in the 1940s and took decades to be perfected by many writers, which is one reason I would submit that this series is so well remembered, because the people making this show had the luxury of taking from decades of stories involving these characters and utilized the best moments to form their series. But with the ventriloquist, and arguably with Killer Croc as well, that wasn't really an option. And yet, this episode still turns out really good. I'd say part of that is because the ventriloquist is such an interesting character who didn't need several decades to become the iconic character known to audiences today. I would very likely be singing a different tune if the ventriloquist and Scarface showed up in the series as often as, say, the Joker does, but since this is his first of only a handful of episodes, I think his shtick is just interesting enough to sustain those appearances and not wear thin while he's still showing up. But even though I think this is a very bizarre and interesting character, the episode here doesn't really focus on his psychosis or even how he gets to this point like so many other introductions of villains in this series. Instead, this episode is more focused on how Batman reacts to this villain. With almost every other villain in this series, Batman is pretty much able to handle it. Even someone like Clayface or Mr. Freeze or Poison Ivy, who have abilities or technology that puts them a league above the ordinary criminal, Batman isn't really fazed by it, but he seems so put off by the ventriloquist. It takes him a while to realize the best way to handle this guy, and maybe it's because I prefer my Batman to be a little less superhuman than he's usually portrayed, but I like that a lot. One thing I kind of have a problem with in this episode, more than most others, is that it isn't very plot-heavy or complex. This isn't quite like Fire from Olympus, an episode that I really hated that had very little plot. I really do like this episode, but when you get right down to it, it takes 20 minutes to cover Scarface robbing two places and Batman finally getting the better of him. Maybe I'm just being too harsh. After all, I've complained plenty of times about an episode that has too much going on in a certain amount of time and isn't able to adequately explore everything it wants to in that time. So maybe I should be happy with the lesser of two evils, but even if the amount of plot remained the same, maybe the banality of the crimes that Scarface is behind could have been spruced up a little bit. Instead of a boxing ring getting robbed, maybe a ship full of android soldiers. Instead of a freighter full of valuable metals, maybe a super soldier serum. Even before shows like Batman Beyond, Superman the Animated Series, and Justice League came along to explore this world and expand it and flesh it out a little bit more, this was a very surreal and stylized world that didn't have to hew so close to the real world. Maybe I wouldn't be complaining so much about the lack of plot here if the plot that we did have was made a little bit more colorful and lively than what it is. But again, I did like this episode, a lot more than Fire from Olympus, and so I don't want to make it seem like this is as much of a problem as I felt that it was in Fire from Olympus. Maybe it's because this episode doesn't have a whole heck of a lot going on in it, but that's all I have to say in this video. Hope you guys liked it, and if you did, you'll be happy to know that next weekend I'll be doing a similar video on an episode of Batman Beyond, and the weekend after that, I'll be tackling another episode of Batman the Animated Series. And I also do other videos throughout the week, so be sure to check those out if you're interested. And if you did like this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. In the meantime, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.